the spirit of sort of keeping on track for this whole day, we're going to get started. Welcome to the writing track for the IGDA Summit. I'm Wendy Despain. I'm really excited about the talks that we have for you today. Writing, it continues to be one of the most important part of games and one of the most ignored. So any opportunity that we have to get together and share best practices and talk about how to do this job better and encourage other developers to improve the state of the art along with us is fantastic. So thank you all for coming. Our first speaker is standing next to me here, Chris TIHOR. Did I say your name right?
Yes, you did.
All right, Chris TIHOR. He said that he brought smoke bombs in case you all get rowdy. So try to keep it all, on the level, and we'll turn it over to him. I have nothing interesting to say. He didn't give me anything interesting to say about him, so he's going to have to tell us why he's an expert.
Thanks. I'm sure you'll have more interesting things to say about me after the presentation. So, yeah, welcome to my presentation, Rummaging in the Geek Culture Toolbox. Geek culture, yay! So I'm Chris TIHOR. I'm a writer, and I'm a huge fan of geek culture. I love it. It's been a huge part of my life as long as I can remember. And I love geek culture. I love to write about it. I love to write for it. I've had the opportunity of writing comics and web comics, board games, video games, science fiction. I even got a chance to write a geek culture column for a newspaper for a little while, and that was a lot of fun. But in working with geek culture and the various forms of it, I noticed there's a lot of similarities between them. And it got me to thinking, how can you use one form of geek culture to help to write for another form of geek culture? And in this case, we're looking at writing for video games. So I thought about this quite a bit, and I came up with a workshop idea that I ran at the International Conference on Interactive Digital Storytelling in Vancouver, BC, just last November. So, and it was a really great opportunity to try out some interesting tools, and it was really sort of eye-opening, and we got some really good discoveries from that. So I want to share what happened with that with you today. So I guess a good place to start would be to define geek culture. At least that's what I thought. I couldn't actually find a solid definitive definition for what geek culture was, so I just made one up. So geek culture is an umbrella term for the subculture of fans of cultural artifacts and activities traditionally considered to be geeky. Well, that's good, but that sort of begs the question, well, what is geeky? I figure anything outside of mainstream culture that lends itself to fanatical devotion, so role-playing games, science fiction, computers, anime, comic books, all that stuff is, in my definition, geeky. So when I was thinking about what other forms of geek culture to employ as tools in writing for video games, I decided to go with two of them, role-playing games and comics, partly because we were sort of limited in time with the workshop, so there's only a few we could touch on. So I'm going to start by talking about role-playing games. So a role-playing game, by definition, is a game in which players assume the roles of characters in a fictional setting. It's a fairly dry description, so I'm going to try and talk about what it's actually like to play role-playing games at a table. Generally what you do is you get a bunch of people together who are going to play, and you sit around a table, you get your characters and everything together, and what you do, in essence, is you create sort of a theater of the mind, where you're using your imagination to create stories and drama and comedy and make it interesting and fun for everybody who's involved. One of the players takes on the role of the dungeon master or the game master, And their role is to basically set the scene and provide a lot of details to the other players of what's happening within this imagined scenario that they're all participating in. And the players will then take the roles of actors, and they'll play their characters in these scenes that have been described. The DM also provides other characters that are both supporting and opposing to make these scenes more interesting, and the players will then react in character to what's happening within the scenes. And hopefully you end up with something that's a lot of fun and pretty dramatic and entertaining at the same time. So how can we use role-playing games with video games? Well, the useful parts of role-playing games that I took out of this for the exercise was that role-playing games are interactive stories. So very heavy on the story aspect of writing. They're a collaborative activity where you're getting a lot of people who are working together to make something that's good and fun. And they're doing that by using improvisation. So with improvisation, you tend to get some surprising outcomes. At the same time, they're exploring characters and exploring what their characters are going to do and how they react to the world around them and to other characters. And you're also exploring the story because you can't really tell what's going to happen until the characters react. And so the story can end up going down a number of different narrative paths. So the exercise I came up with is using role-playing games for building worlds, characters, and story. So in this exercise, we started by brainstorming on a given game idea, focusing on world building and characters. And after generating a sufficient quantity of ideas, we developed scenarios based on those ideas. And we also came up with some simple characters to interact in those scenarios. And we would take those scenarios and then we would play them out in small groups. So we'd have one person who would act as the DM or game master, and 3 people who played as characters. And we'd have one other person whose main job would be to record what happened during these scenarios and how they played out. We went with very simple characters, not like the 4-page sort of character sheets that you might see in some of the role-playing games. So essentially, I told them, pick 4 words to describe your character and go with that. We also put on a time limit just to keep things under some sort of control. We determined after we finished the time limit, we were just going to stop and talk about the scenarios. But other things you can do is you can set a time limit and then switch out so people can take different roles after the time goes up so that everybody gets a chance to contribute in different ways. So how'd it go? Well, actually it was pretty awesome. I was completely blown away by some of the ideas that came out of the scenarios that were played. A number of the people had never played role-playing games before in their life or anything like it, so that was exciting in the first place because it's always great to see new people playing role-playing games. But it was also exciting in that those ideas, the ideas that they came up with often broke the unwritten rules of role-playing games. For instance, there was quite a few character rivalries, and I know a lot of groups won't allow sort of conflict between characters within their group. The setting that we came up with for the scenario was a modern fantasy setting, and we had this idea of the characters belonging to this group of monster hunters who are basically traveling across the world, hunting down monsters and capturing them and bringing them back to their base for scientific study and stuff. So in the first scenario, we had a group of these monster hunters, but we also had another person who was playing a different character whose main goal was to free all the monsters who were captured by this company and by other associated groups. So they, of course, came into conflict with the monster hunters as being part of like a monster liberation front or something like that. So there was a lot of good conflict, sort of arguments, and also a little bit of violence as well. But as you know, conflict is can make stories very rich. So that was pretty exciting. That came out of one group, and the other group, the dungeon master had no experience in role-playing games at all, and just said, "I'm going to be the dungeon master and try this out," and she did a great job. She actually had each of the characters start in a completely different area. They were not together as a group. So the scenario was about investigating a zombie factory. Basically, there was this nefarious group who were capturing humans and turning them into a zombie army. And one of the characters was a prisoner. He was one of the people who got captured to be turned into a zombie. Another of the characters was one of the monster hunters investigating for this monster hunter group. And the third character was a zombie master in her own right, and she was investigating, I guess, checking out the competition. So it was great in that they established these separate histories for each of these characters. And not only did you have the separate histories, but it came together and they suddenly had this mutual history at that one point of investigating this factory. So it was really exciting, some of the stuff that had come out of there. Overall, it was very imaginative and surprising, the results that people had come up with. So for you, when can you use role-playing game sessions? Well, I suggest really early in the game's life cycle. You can use these sessions to help you with your world building activities. Later on, you can employ them for fleshing out your characters and storyline, and you can use them at any point to, if you need a little inspiration, or if you run into some problems with character or story arcs, it's a great way to sort of try and work out these problems as a team. So the second exercise that we got into was around comics. So the question is, I guess to start off with, is what are comics? Well, Will Eisner says comics are sequential art, or the arrangement of pictures or images and words to narrate a story or dramatize an idea. Well, how are they connected to video games? Well, both video games and comics are a visual media with words as a key element, either words in print or words as recorded voices. Some of the early games featured static images and text, and in that way they're much like a comic. When you're working with both comics and video games, you want to make sure that you limit wordiness. Too many words on a page or too many words on a screen at once can overshadow and sort of dominate your page or screen, and it's not very pleasant to the eye, and it can be very confusing. And on a screen and on a page, you have limited space, so you can only fit so much on a page at a time. So brevity can be important. Once you strike the right balance between text and visual elements, then you end up with a screen or a page that's pleasing to the eye and has a certain symmetry and balance to it. So the exercise I came up with was using comics to practice concise writing and writing for visual media. So the task was to translate a page from a work of fiction into a single-page comic. So I gave them 2 pages that they could choose from. One was from Alice in Wonderland, and one was from Picture of Dorian Gray. So without including every line of dialogue or every action that occurs on the source page, the challenge was to distill the essence of the source material and fit it into the limited space of the page. So in doing that, we followed a traditional approach to creating a comic by writing a script first and then producing the artwork from the script. So how'd it go? Well, that went pretty great too, actually. We got a little short in time, so more time would have been better. We didn't get as many comics finished as I had hoped. But from the ones that we did get finished, we got an excellent variety of interpretation of the source material. For instance, 2 of the people who had done Dorian Gray, they had chosen that scene, which was a scene where Dorian ends up stabbing a friend of his at the end of the scene. The first person took a very sort of humorous approach and just drew stick figures, kind of like XKCD or, very simple form, and they made it humorous, where it was like Dorian was just hanging around, and then all of a sudden it was like stabbity, stabbity, stab. So it was pretty funny. But another person took a completely different view of it and went with more sort of a dark, gothic, heavy approach. Lots of black and shadows. It was very serious and heavy and very reminiscent of like Edgar Allan Poe or something like that. So we have 2 interpretations from one source material that were completely different, but both viable. The second thing that we ran into was some people had to learn brevity the hard way. We had one person who tried desperately to fit all of the text from his chosen source material onto the comic page, and it just was not happening. It was confusing and he tried very hard, but it didn't work. So this page was super saturated and unreadable. So when would you use comics? Well, if you're looking to practice brevity of writing, it's a good place to start. You're being that you're limited by the physical size of the page. If you're looking to visualize certain scenes and you're wondering how it would look in a visual media, then to sketch it out as a comic will give you a better idea of how it might play out in another visual media like video games. And if you're investigating of what you should show versus what you should tell, because some of the descriptive text can be better illustrated by using pictures instead of more descriptive text on a comic page. So in summary, you got 2 great tools here. With role-playing games, it's really good for world building, good for investigating character and story, and really helpful in general for generating ideas. And with comics, you're able to practice concise writing and writing for a visual media, and it's really good for executing ideas, to do storyboarding or visualization of some text. So I recommend employing them. I recommend looking into other forms of geek culture or looking further into role-playing games or comics and seeing what you can come up with to help you out as more tools, because you can always use more tools for writing for video games. So thank you very much.
All right, now I get to explain a little bit more. We're going to try something kind of different. If you look in if you look at the schedule, this is billed as a panel talk and not just one speaker. So we're going to do this with most of the talks today. I have discovered over the years of going to conferences that my favorite part of the conference comes after the talks, you know, in the evening when I'm hanging out with friends and we're talking about the talks. So instead of just me and my little group of friends having these great conversations, we're going to share that with the whole audience. So various speakers from throughout the day are going to be coming up after our first, you know, 20-minute presentation, and we'll talk about this. So Rich, come on up here, and you and I are going to have a conversation, and of course we're going to include Chris in this. That's one of the downsides after in the bar afterwards. We often have these conversations and have questions for the speaker, and the speaker is not there. So if you want to join us at the table, yeah, come on in. So I think these are working. All right.
This was, of course, a complete surprise to me.
So I was actually taking notes. Ha ha ha. So
that's not good.
Unless I'm going to start with you. What do you think of this talk? What did you think?
I thought it was really interesting. I mean, my background actually is in tabletop role-playing games. If you've seen the kids hanging out in coffee shops pretending to be vampires doing this, that's partially my fault, and I am so sorry. But I think I've always been prone to going back to what I learned in tabletop to try and help out my writing for video games. And I think the most important lesson I learned there was that tabletop writing was always about creating the space for the players to do whatever. And that's something that translates very directly to video games.
So I was thinking that the process that you described in the workshop, where you had the 3 people sit around and play out the RPG, I have to admit, I'm not an RPG player. I'm not a tabletop player. I know. I tried it once and it didn't go well, and oh well. So, but I was thinking that this exercise that you described is basically what a writer, or at least what I do in my head when I write for anything. It's just that I'm playing all 3 of the characters. So, you know, I'm over here for this character, and then I switch my mental focus to another character. And I'm sure that you come up with some slightly more interesting things when it's not all just in your own head. Mm-hmm. So did you find that from what you did in the workshop?
Oh, absolutely. I mostly observed the groups. So I had, you know, I wasn't sharing what was going on in my own head at that point. But it is interesting because I guess often we have certain ideas of what characters are going to do. And so we've worked it out in our heads to, oh yeah, and as the dungeon master, if you're preparing these scenarios ahead of time to try and move people in a certain direction with the story, you're always like, oh yeah, they're totally gonna go and pick up that bottle and drink the potion, and you know. But of course, when it comes to the players actually doing something, that thing that you actually really wanted them to do, they're probably not gonna do. Even if you put, well, especially if you put big signs saying, do this. So having other players and other people contributing and running their own characters definitely gives you new insight to the possibilities with characters, mm-hmm. because they'll just do things you had no idea that they were going to come up with.
And what do you think about this as a tool for developing character voice?
I think it's an excellent tool, actually, because especially if you have people who are playing characters. I mean, you could start, if they're characters that they're familiar with to a certain degree, or they play more than once, then I know a lot of role players who will get right into character and will, you know, come up with accents or ways of speaking and they'll get right into the thing. I've also had other people who just, they're like, my barbarian says rawr and attacks. But I know a lot of actors or people who have a tendency towards acting, and they'll just be like, rah, let's get them, forth my brothers and strike, you know, and that way you get quite a voice being developed. for those characters. So any character you're not quite sure of how they're gonna, just give it to the actors, and they'll think of something.
So you described doing this in a workshop setting. Have you done this on any video game projects that you have worked on?
I haven't had the opportunity to do it with the group. So no, I mean, I've done work with more on the comic side, where I'll be thinking about a particular scene and how it's going to play out, and I'll just do a storyboard from it. Mm-hmm. I haven't had a good opportunity to use the role-playing game exercise yet, but I really want to.
Yeah, I running it through in my head, going, oh, with the team I'm working with right now, how would that work? What would I learn from it? What would they learn from it? And of course, I start worrying about worst case scenarios and wondering if people on the team who are not the writers would start getting really attached to characters or wanting to take them in a direction that you don't intend to take it in the game that you're creating. So I wonder if it would cause some more difficulties than just dictating to them. But I'm of the this is the way it will be kind of person. So.
Right.
Play Call of Cthulhu, they won't have time to get attached to their characters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is the chance that they'd get attached to certain characters, but then when they die horribly, you'll see the pathos right there, and you'll be able to draw upon that for your writing experience.
Well, and I can see a lot of benefit to having like the programmers really start to buy into the characters, because that's one of the things with working on a project as the writer, that a lot of times the rest of the team doesn't really get what you bring to this project, and mm-hmm. So if you involve them this way in the whole project, then I can see where it would actually help. I'm just seeing worst case scenarios in my head.
Well, I recall reading a while ago about I think it was, they're working on the Temple of Elemental Evil, so I think it was Troika, and they were talking about how they would have like nightly role-playing game sessions that included like all of the teams. So I could see like including the programmers and everybody in that to give them the feel like, I don't know, it's that sort of feeling of camaraderie too, when you bring everybody together into a group to have an adventure. And so I could see that as like even being a really good sort of team building skill or activity.
Did I interrupt you?
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
I was thinking also potentially this would be a great way to explore building character backstories and getting people invested in the game as a whole, as opposed to just, okay, we've unwrapped the character, he's a hard-bitten ex-space marine.
Yeah.
And he wants vengeance.
Yeah.
And possibly using role-playing sessions as a way to flesh out his world, his universe, and give him a feel of having lived a bit before the load screen.
Oh, for sure. And I think more and more you're seeing in game development, you're getting you'll get add-ons that sort of like, oh, learn about this character before she became part of the League of Assassins or something. So it could be, and often that comes as like downloadable content for a game, or it's
on the website or
on the
something
website.
like that, yeah.
And so if you don't use the backstory in the game itself, it's something that can come out in the sort of related transmedia, I guess.
So the hard-bitten Space Marine is actually something that came up when I was thinking about writing the Geek Toolbox. Stereotypes tend to be kind of famous in the Geek Toolbox. Mm-hmm. Do you have suggestions for using this method and not falling into having the tank and the healer and the paladin and the traditional group that always shows up in the Geek Toolbox?
Well, I mean, part of the reason that those traditional roles show up is that people are familiar with them and they like them because they're familiar with them, and they follow sort of the archetypes of characters. But yeah, I myself, I like to get away from those as well. So one of the suggestions, I guess, would be when I was talking about making simple characters and having 4 words to describe your characters, I could see like writing a randomizer program, or just getting a whole bunch of descriptive words and putting them in a hat, and then you have to draw 4. And then that's going to be the character that you play. So you could end up with a very, you know, a quiet, nurturing barbarian, you know, or something like that, or quiet, nurturing space marine.
All right. Do you have anything else, or shall we open it up to the audience?
Let's open up to the audience.
All right.
They seem restive.
We don't want to use those smoke bombs. In the back.
Are there any, when utilizing the role-playing game method to inspire your writing, are there any legal precautions that you should take with the team that you're doing the exercise with?
I keep sharp knives away, just in case. I'm not sure. So the question was about legal precautions for the team?
So when I was young, just like a lot of you, I played role-playing games with my friends, and if that inspired me to create a story, I mean, at what point do you think there needs to be some sort of protection for the work that you're creating against the exercise that you use to inspire it? Or should there be any? It's not even a concern.
Well, I would consider the exercise to be part of the development work that you're doing, and so you would be using other people who are working on the project, was my original intention. But if you wanted to try that with, say, your friends at home, if you're just trying to work out something, I mean, you can always get them to sign like a non-disclosure agreement or something like that. Though you should probably get a lawyer to actually draw that up for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned writing for some board games.
Yep.
I just wanted to put you on the spot and see if you had any ideas about exercises using board game tools from board games.
You did put me on the spot.
That's all I wanted. I didn't much want to
Excellent question.
Well, what I've found actually, and from reading Jesse Schell's book, was that board games are often used as paper prototypes, or so if you have I think particularly if you're working on mechanics for your game, so this is more sort of in the game design arena, then often you can just raid your board game collection and do a quick prototype of the mechanic that you're trying to explore, using the pieces of the board game. And you might want to grab certain rules from from board games as well to sort of say, oh, well, you know, let's try this, but with, you know, more of a resource collection mechanic from Agricola or something like that. So that's sort of where I would see it. I can't think of any way off the top of my head that you could use it for strict sort of story and game writing. You guys have any ideas?
I would highly recommend, I think it's called Once Upon a Time. It's a storytelling card game that James Wallace, I believe, designed. And it's a wonderful tool for improvising stories on the fly using archetypal elements. And I found that's been very useful, actually.
I was actually thinking of combining the board game idea with the RPG idea because, like I said, I don't really play RPGs, but I can imagine sitting around a table and playing a board game of some kind and asking the players to be playing the board game in a character. So we're all playing, you know, diplomacy or whatever you want to come up with, but role play this character from the story as you're playing it. And that might, I mean, one of the things about board games is that it forces you to do things like stab your friend in the back, and it forces you to do things like you know, work for your own good instead of somebody else's good, or it kind of brings out some emotions and opportunities that may not be there just naturally, and you get to see what those characters would do in those situations if, you know, if I really do have to send you to jail and collect $200.
I would point out Candyland gets really bloody this way.
That's a good point. Yes.
2 points. Firstly, I second the recommendation of Once Upon a Time, and I also found another game that sort of similar called I Dark Overlord, where you basically play the minions of an evil lord, and you're trying to explain to him why you've botched your mission. It's really cool.
Yeah.
The question I have though is, when you sort of had the initial thing of like the Geek Toolbox, you actually had a picture from an anime up there. And of course, you know, a lot of geek culture is based on, you know, movies, TV shows, anime, things like that. But those are, how can I put it, those seem like we partake of them in a much more passive kind of way. I mean, it's very difficult to sit down and make an anime. So how, when we're talking about using those parts of the geek culture toolbox, what sort of exercises can we use when, you know, you can't just sit down and make an anime, as it were?
Well, although you could sit down and make an anime, as a writer, you could do that part at least, right? I mean, unless you know a talented team of animators who are just willing to whip one up from your script, it's true, you're probably not going to produce something from it. But there are other things, aspects of anime that you can take and apply to whatever projects you're working on. I mean, anime has some very distinctive character types and certain looks and mannerisms of characters that you don't really see or you haven't seen traditionally in the Western animation. So
you would say it's more kind of a taking inspiration and applying it to the own work, as opposed to like an actual exercise where you get together with a team and you, like, you know, play a game or you make a comic together. Like, I'm just trying to figure out if there's sort of an active exercise you can do with your team with that kind of stuff, as opposed to just watching and saying, well, you know, what can we do with that character archetype or whatever.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, in this way, you can actually combine more than one form of geek culture, and you can say, well, you know, we've got this set of characters, and we're kind of stuck with what we're going to do with them. Let's re-envision them as anime characters, and oh, well, let's role-play them as anime characters, and, you know, have them react in that way. And then you might see new emergent behavior coming from those characters that you can go, wait a minute, that actually works really well for Joe Blow or whoever your character is.
Our Space Marine, who is sensitive and quiet. There's a question in the back here, and then I'll get to
There's an awesome product called Story Cubes for generating background characteristics and stuff like that. It's like $3. It's a set of 3 by 3 dice that have abstract symbols on them, and so you basically plug in whatever kind of narrative or apply it to whatever kind of genre.
Story cubes, okay. I'm going to write that down.
Toya.
I actually had a comment about comics in character voice, because really great dialogue in comics basically distills the personality of the character in the dialogue. Did you find that when you were doing the exercises that they were really focused on getting unique voices through the dialogue, or did they not really consider that? They were just writing text, they were just writing dialogue.
With the role-playing?
Yeah, I mean, no, with the comics.
Oh, I think if we had, unfortunately we had run short of time on the comics. I think if we had had a bit more time to work on that aspect of it, we would have got more distinct voices coming out of it. As it was, I think people were more focused on the physical rendition of it a bit more, and just often choosing which phrases of dialogue would be the ones that they would use. But I think if we had more time, or we'd put more time into it, then we'd definitely have come up with more deep dialogue or voices for the characters.
Because I would imagine they would find at some point you could just take the text and just look at the dialogue and figure out what character is saying it. You know, and that would really show them something about the importance of having a unique voice. And, you know, what the character says as much about who they are as, like, what their actions are.
Absolutely, and some of the, like for instance, we used Alice in Wonderland, which has many very distinct voices in it. I mean, Alice has that sort of, you know, I was trying to keep it together in this crazy place sort of voice, and occasionally getting a bit miffed at all these crazy characters. And then in the Tea Party scene, which was what I had sort of taken it from, you have these odd characters, but they all have their distinct voice there with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare and the Dormouse. So I think it would be, I think it would work really well.
I was actually excited about that because I'm currently right in the middle of dealing on this project with that struggle between how much text ends up on the screen and how you really have to say a lot with pictures. And I was trying to explain it all long form. And if I just say, like in comics, then they will get it. You know, if I say you can't do that, remember a comics page full of text is no fun to read, then they will go, oh, right, well, you're right, we can do this differently. Yeah.
When you're writing dialogue for games, are you encouraged to add acting, like for the artist, like to give acting cues in case your dialogue may not necessarily express how a character should be behaving on screen?
Did you?
I tend to do stuff like that very sparingly. Obviously, the dialogue, whether it's being written for an artist or for an actor, is for them to interpret, and you don't want to straitjacket what they're doing too much. If it's something that's really important, then you give that sort of note, but ideally what you're saying is clear enough and the context is good enough that you'll be able to communicate what you want without that sort of, you must do it this way, and the collaboration will be better than having them simply follow instructions.
It's everyone's got a different view on this, and you'd probably want to talk it out with your team. I had one person say, I've never had an actor say, well, I wish there was less direction from the writer, because they will feel free to ignore whatever you say anyway. So they were encouraging me to put as much direction as possible. But there's also this other point of view, which is, you know, don't straitjacket them and allow them the freedom to interpret it their own way. I find that it's most important to put that kind of direction in when in your head you're having them say something sarcastic or say one thing but mean the other thing. And those are really the best lines. Those are the memorable ones when people are playing a game, are the ones where the words don't necessarily match the meaning. And you'll see that in film as an example. But communicating that to the team who actually puts it on the screen is really important, because even though you're reading it and in your head the sarcasm is obvious, it's not going to be obvious to everybody, and they will occasionally completely screw up your script by making it straight when you meant funny. So yeah.
I've heard that occasionally they'll allow the writer to be present for voice recordings. I haven't done this myself.
I hear rumors of this.
I hear rumors of this sort of.
I can assure you it's true.
Wow.
And you sit there very, very still until they say, what does this mean? And then you have about 3 seconds to explain everything. That's actually really cool.
It's my chance. 3 seconds.
No, it's actually,
what?
it's very useful and it's very positive in that you can provide context for lines, and really that's the prime benefit, which is providing that context so people have more understanding so they can interpret in their own way instead of just being there as it's supposed to be like this. That's the director's job, not the writer's.
All right, any other questions?
You have 10 minutes left.
Well, there's supposed to be a 10-minute break between. So I think we're going to wrap it up, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes for our next fantastic oh, is there a question?
Oh, no,
Oh, okay. Just saying hi. Thank you. And thank you.
Thanks.